Would you like to say something strange? Come with us and you will see. This our town of Halloween. This is Halloween, this is Halloween. Oh, scream in the dead of night. This is Halloween, everybody make us see. Trick or treat, tell me what's your time. It's our town of Halloween. It's town of Halloween. We come home, everyone feels a pumpkin song. In this town, don't be lonely now, everybody's waiting for the next surprise. Something's waiting for the monster now. Aren't you scared when the best just flies? One never come with the dead of night. Everybody's afraid, everybody's afraid. Tell me the rain, the terror with face, hair with flash and bomb on trees. I am the who, cold who's there. I am the midnight through your hair. I am the shadow of the moon at night, filling your dreams to the brim with fright. This is Halloween, this is Halloween, 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 Halloween. Tender lovelies everywhere, lights so fun without a good scare. That's a joke that we will be in our town of Halloween. In this town, don't be loud now, everyone's waiting for the next surprise. Skeleton Jack might get you tonight. Scream on the magic and you jump down from the chain. This is Halloween, everyone's saying, he's been waiting for the next surprise. I'm that child, keep us looking like everyone hail to the pumpkin king. This is Halloween, this is Halloween, Halloween. We come home, everyone feels the pumpkin
Greetings, our children of the night. Welcome to Podcast One Shot, where we watch and analyze videos in order to discuss about. With me is the petty dabbler of the dark arts, the authenticator, aka Dalton L. Mortimer.
Good evening, the children of the night. What beautiful music they make. Presumably.
And I'm your host / zombie lover, the brainstormer of pop culture. But first, a word from our sponsor. We don't have one.
This will eventually, hopefully, be brought to you by you and no one else with anyone.
So, welcome to October, by the way, before we really get started.
Yes, if you couldn't tell by the song, we're both very excited for the seasonal festivities. What with the embracing of the darker aspects of the universe and so on and so forth.
Overall, we had said this before on our last few podcasts. We will be doing a themed month with October, and we may cover things that are social justice warrior stuff, but mainly it is revolving about our love and just overall the coolness of All Hallows Eves or Samhain or Halloween or various different names it's been known by.
Insert the darkness embracing harvest festival of your choice here.
Mm-hmm. For the record, we will be playing that song pretty much every time.
Yes, because this is Halloween, and we don't care who knows it.
Yeah. But if you want to check out that song, there are links down in the description. So we are. Hold on, let me do a screen share here. So we are doing a Wisecrack video. I do not believe we've done one before. We have talked about doing one, but haven't. Correct?
Yeah, because usually they are not stupid enough to make them worth covering. There is a little bit of oversimplicity and facileness to them, but
Um,
it's not usually infuriating enough to cover.
mhm.
But they did a video discussing the Netflix anime version of Castlevania, and they tried desperately to stick a theme where one wasn't fitting, and so here we are.
Right. Okay. Keep in mind it has been a while since I've seen the series, so I'm a little. It's a little faded in my memory, but I will do my best as best I can. So just for the record, because I do feel like we have to say this, Wisecrack, which is a good channel, and I do recommend checking out their content. Um, this is simply for our month of October theme and for arguments and discussion purposes. We are in
Yeah.
no way attacking nor singling out Wisecrack. We simply wish to hear their arguments and offer our counter arguments if there is need to.
Yes, just a few words to the wisecrack, if you like.
I will allow that. Okay, there's no look of disappointment this time.
Woohoo! I got one. Lol.
Right. Okay. Let us start.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare. What's up, Wisecrack? Jared here on the set of Earthling Cinema, which, if you didn't know, is its own channel now. We got a lot of requests to do Castlevania after its second season dropped, and gotta say, it's pretty good. We loved its artwork, the references to the games, and some great voice performances. Getting
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Scarecrows.
I suppose you could have gone like poison apples or something to keep with the food related theme.
That's true.
Anyway, Jack-o'-lantern.
The good people of Gracia to commit murder for you. See how you do on your own.
But as we tried to discover a philosophy of the show, we fell a little bit short. The show's writer, Warren Ellis, clearly puts a lot of thought into his work, but as far as we can tell, they haven't really fully formed in Castlevania yet. Now, despite that, we still...
Okay, and here comes the crux of my issue, Jared. You assume that the philosophies of the show are supposed to be found sort of secondarily or externally to the material rather than in the material itself. This is a problem that I have with you and a lot of other like video essayist type channels a lot of the time. They always seem to forego the most literal or straightforward interpretation. They assume by default there is automatically a metaphor of some kind rather than just taking it as a literal portrayal of something, which is a bit of a problem that you fall into here. But just to sort of keep my thesis statement kind of close to my chest for now, why do you assume that Warren Ellis is the one who added shit to Castlevania? Could he not have simply been adapting faithfully a version of Castlevania and let the show itself dictate the theming? That might solve your little conundrum here and cut through a little bit of the confusion. If you allow for the possibility that the meaning, such as it is in the art itself, not in the artist. And this might just be me and my philosophical biases, but I prefer what's referred to as the Michelangelo definition of art. What he often said was the sculptures that he made were already in the raw materials used to make them. He just chipped away all the unneeded bits. And in my personal opinion, that should at the very least be your first port of call when dealing with art. Don't assume external metaphor when internal logic is adequate.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, Jack-o'-lantern.
Still wanted to talk about some of the ideas we noticed cropping up that may be further fleshed out in ensuing seasons. So welcome to this Wisecrack Half-Baked edition on Netflix's Castlevania. And as usual, spoilers ahead. Now first, a quick recap. It's 1455 in the land of Wallachia, and Dracula has just found out that his human wife has been burned at the stake for practicing science.
One thing he said, I don't know if that's intentional, because I always notice that thing, that more often than not they pronounce it differently than how it's actually pronounced, like in the show or in the medium. It is.
Wallachia?
That was Wallachia.
Either, I believe, is technically correct. What they're referring to, in terms of what Wallachia actually is a sort of sub-province of the country Romania. We're usually more familiar with the other major county in Romania, which is Transylvania.
Jinx.
Yeah. Because of course that is the country that is the county that is most traditionally associated with Dracula. Although incidentally, the region that I think he would prefer us associating him with, as in the historical figure Dracula, is probably the Carpathian Mountains, which is where he spent the majority of his leisure time, or when he needed to get away from things. In fact, when Ghostbusters 2 was being written and they were looking for sort of inspiration for Vigo the Carpathian, the main source of inspiration was Vladislas Tepes Dracula, otherwise known as Vlad the Impaler. But that's neither here nor there. Into the next breach, where we will start getting into the nitty gritty of the stupid.
Give me one moment. I need to clean my glasses.
All right.
And I'm good.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Scarecrows.
Science, or as the Catholic Church like to call it, witchcraft.
She called it all science, yeah. Lisa Tepe of Liverpool was so far gone that she just couldn't see that it was all given to her by Satan.
So naturally, he goes all John Wick and promises to return in exactly 1 year to kill all mankind.
Well,
Okay, first of all, let's be perfectly clear here. And this is a thing that's going to be repeated throughout the video. The show does an excellent job of distinguishing between religion, science, and magic. And my friends at Wisecrack, you appear to have completely forgotten the existence of magic unless it's convenient to you. And that really annoys me as a practicing occultist for the last 13 and a half goddamn years. Thank you very much. Being that as it may, it's important to remember that magic in Castlevania does in fact exist, and just because the church couldn't tell the difference, that doesn't mean that the two are interchangeable. It just means the church were a bunch of ignorant fucks, which, given that this was, medieval Romania, perfectly legitimate assumption.
I'll be honest, I think he's a bishop or something.
Yeah.
He is literally one of the very few characters in fiction. I guess antagonist. I don't know if I call him that, but he's actually one of the very few antagonists I actually would like to punch in the face repeatedly.
Again, as someone who actually practices magic and has for the majority of their adult life, and a significant proportion of their non-adult life, this guy is everything I hate about some denominations of Christianity.
Right. It's not exactly the religion itself that's the problem. It's more of the people that run it.
Yeah, it's him being a moralistic fuckwit is the problem, and that is usually the problem with most, especially organized religions, when you think that you have the one right moral answer in the entire universe, and all other answers are for some reason or other inadmissible, you do stupid shit.
Yeah, I've actually thought about doing a story about that. Kind of. Never really worked it out. I kind of sort of scrapped it. I mean, it's like it's still there in my head. I've just never written it down.
Yeah, but
Essentially,
I totally sympathize with your opinion of the bishop because, yeah, let's just be clear. When I first watched Castlevania, I was totally and completely on Dracula's side where the bishop was concerned. Especially the kind of eye roll he gives when they refer to him as Satan, because it's just like, oh my god, these people are fucking idiots. What the fuck am I doing here? That look is amazing. And I totally sympathize with Dracula's plight of this person is the one person in all the world that makes my life worth living, and you took her away, so fuck you.
yeah, I agree with that. It's just I think he does go a little too extreme. I think we've had this discussion. I get it. I admit he's not wrong. Like his wife was pretty much the only thing that made him from not murdering basically all of humanity already, and taking that away. I get that. It's just again, I'm also I'm more. I'm always the middle guy. I try to see it from both perspectives, and I agree more with Alucard. Kill those responsible, but
leave the rest of humanity alone. But I also sort of see it from his perspective of, well, she was the only worthwhile human, and now she's dead, so fuck them. They're basically vermin to me now. Because on my worst days, and a significant proportion of my just average days, the majority of humanity suck, myself included. The only people that I actually give a damn about are the individual humans that I actually care about. And if anything happens to those individual humans, no, fuck it. That I empathize with that statement of, you had one job just to keep these individual humans alive, and you failed at that job. Fuck it, I'm burning it all down.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I don't disagree with Dracula's overall plight. It's just I don't know. I feel like he just goes overboard.
He does, but then again, if you've been around for hundreds, possibly thousands of years, and you haven't found a single human worthwhile, and you find one, and a bunch of religious whack jobs who think they're in the moral right kill her for cockamamie half-assed reasons, yeah, I can kind of see the fuck it, they'll never learn, I'm burning it all down opinion.
Yeah, I can get that. It's just again, I kind of think I draw the line at slaughtering infants.
Yeah, that's totally justified. But I can see where he's coming from, and if I were in his place, I can't honestly say that I would be doing anything different.
I mean, yeah, you take basically the whole world away from someone, and they got none left. Yeah, I can see that happening because I'll be honest. I'd probably be on the same side of Dracula, but again,
Especially given that it's medieval Europe we're talking about. Like
yeah,
if this was the modern age, that would be one thing. Like if this was him trying to commit genocide on the modern humans, that would be one thing. But people in the Middle Ages were fucks. Just fucked in every conceivable dimension. So
yeah.
I could totally buy into the possibility that in the entire world as he knows it, there is only one worthwhile human being. And in the absence of that, it's just, nope, fuck it.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think, and I'm gonna take a wild guess here. It's the theme that's against religion or something like that. On the dark.
I don't necessarily. Well, that's not where he goes. At least not at first. I just think as usual, Wisecrack kind of oversimplified, and one of the ways they oversimplified that gets under my skin is they kind of discount the entirety of the literal or straightforward interpretations rather than doing any of that. They just go for as abstract of a theme as they possibly can, and it annoys me because in my personal lexicon of this kind of shit, you never attribute to a metaphorical interpretation what can adequately be expressed in a literal interpretation. Like, just as an example, I really hate when magic is used in stories as a metaphor for either science or religion, because the great thing about magic is it is fundamentally neither of those things. There are some religions that have magical aspects to them, and there are some ways in which magic and science are similar, but it will always be concretely separate from both of those things, and that's one of the things that makes it so unique. So I would prefer a story in which magic is not an allegory for anything except itself, because there's enough there in the literal interpretation to feed your story without needing to make it an allegory for something else. Plus, when you make one thing an allegory for another thing, you kind of implicitly say, whatever I'm making this an allegory for is more important than the literal thing itself. And again, as a practicing occultist, fuck you. You don't get to say that science or religion is more important than my shit. I'm not gonna say that my shit is more important than religion or science, but I'm not going to sit here and be lectured about how your shit is more important than my shit either. I prefer every kind of human endeavor is on the level, whether it be art, whether it be science, whether it be philosophy, whether it be magic. I prefer everything just held to some kind of universal quality standard. But what the fuck do I know?
You're just some guy. No, wait.
Yeah, different sometimes pontificating content producer, who you should be subscribed to, by the way. If you're not and you're watching this, go search for Just Some Guy on YouTube. He's awesome.
I think he was one of the first guys I subscribed to when I started getting into the whole Confiscate thing.
I got really jealous of him a while ago because he actually got to go on Honey Badger Radio, and as our regular use of the term banana in video responses should tell you, I'm a big fan of the Honey Badgers, and I was really jealous of Just Some Guy when he got to be interviewed by Brian Martinez. And if Brian ever watches this, fucking have me on, Brian. Damn you.
Well, I was also planning. Well, someday I am going to try and get Just Some Guy. We actually did try and get him on once, but Game of Thrones was happening, so.
Yeah, we did successfully get Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini on though for like half a show. So
yeah,
there is hope for our guest appearance radar. Although I'd like for a time when we could have them on again when Corrupt is here, because I think the three of us balance each other out really well. Anyway, Moving on.
Okay.
Pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns.
And scarecrows.
Then I'll wait for you, my commander.
1 year later, and sure enough, an army of the night descends on the country. Meanwhile, Trevor Belmont, the last drunken descendant of a family of vampire hunters, helps a group of nomads, the Speakers, find their missing friend Sypha, who just so happens to be an actor.
For the record, they're not just vampire hunters, they're monster hunters.
Yeah, and even that could conceivably be reductive, because as we find out later, they are interested in magical knowledge for its own sake to some extent.
Damn it. I'm
Huh?
sorry, Don. I just realized I became one of those actually guys.
You did, but it was warranted. And speaking of actually, Actually, I'm not sure wizard is the most appropriate term for Sypha.
I don't think it said wizard yet. I think it was in the middle of saying witch.
Yeah, but that being said, I don't think wizard is the most appropriate term for Sypha. I guess if you're going, I concede that it depends somewhat on your dialect, but personally, if I was to give her a word, that word would be sorceress. Because
I think they were referred to as a speaker magician in the show.
yeah, or yeah, just magician would probably be the most honest in interpretation. I do love how someone accuses her of being a witch and she straight up just repudiates it by the technicalities of the definition of the word witch in the Middle Ages. Because, of course, there was quite a different definition of the word witch in the Middle Ages than there was in the Roman occupation times.
Wait, didn't the term witch come from like the term Wicca or Wiccan?
Wiccan, no. Wicca, yes. See, both the religion of Wicca and the term witch come from the Anglo-Saxon word wisa, which means craft of the wise. Incidentally, in most Romance languages or early Romance languages, a double C is pronounced as an S.
Huh.
But that's neither here nor there. As for the word wizard comes from the Latin wizen, which means wise one. And both terms are essentially a non-English take on what was referred to in the Middle Ages as a cunning man or a wise woman, which were essentially the village shamans and magicians and priests of a village or a community that weren't in the official like church or religious hierarchies and so forth. But as for Sypha, most of what we see her manipulating is elemental magic, and it's derived largely from her own personal energy. And at least in most of the dialects I've seen, the word sorcerer either means someone who practices black magic, or someone who manipulates personal energy. And as such, the most fitting term for her is probably sorceress, because as she herself points out in the show, when she gets called a witch in the Middle Ages, the word witch meant someone who made a pact with a demon or served a demon, and she does not do that. So witch and wizard are probably both not quite in her wheelhouse. And good for her. Also, Sypha is amazingly hot. At least in my humble opinion. She's beautiful, she has an amazing accent, and she's a sorceress. I don't require anything else from my female counterparts. So Sypha, if you ever find yourself in the modern era in our universe, call me. Presumably after Trevor either dies or disowns you or something, because he's an ass.
Actually, well, I have to agree with Trevor on one thing he had said. It's not his fault. It's everyone else that's a miserable piece of shit.
Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. I do not hate Trevor Belmont. He is kind of an idiot though, and I enjoy Sypha and Alucard bonding over the fact that they can both read and use magic, whereas he is an illiterate fuck who cannot.
I don't think they ever said he was illiterate in the show.
They make it quite explicit that he can't read or understand magic, so I'm gonna gather that means he's illiterate. If he straight up cannot read, then yeah, he's kind of by definition illiterate.
Sorry, I forgot an alarm on my phone.
Yeah, and given that he was forced to leave home when he was like 13 and he hadn't gotten any of the like family instruction yet, I'm gonna go ahead and assume he probably doesn't know how to read most of the things.
I mean, you're probably not wrong. I don't remember much. Again, I saw the season 2 when it first came out. I binged the whole thing in like a day. So
Uh-huh.
and it's been a while.
Which speaking of, this video was made right before season 3 came out, or right as or season 2 came out, or right as season 2 was airing.
January 29th.
Yeah.
No, just January 29th. January 5th, 2019.
So that being said, Netflix, where the fuck is season 3? I want season 3, damn it. You should really time your Halloween-oriented content so that it comes out during Halloween. Like, there's absolutely no reason we shouldn't be getting a Castlevania Season 3 and a Sabrina Season 3 in October, where it belongs.
I think the show, I guess show creator, Andy Shakar, I believe, is busy with his Devil May Cry series right now.
Well, the Devil May Cry, but I really shouldn't be forced to. So get on Castlevania Season 2 or 3.
Warren Ellis is the writer for this show.
Yes.
The name's not familiar. I know he's done comic books, but I feel like we've covered him. I think I might be thinking of Garth Ennis.
If I recall, did we cover Warren Ellis? I think I know we covered Garth Ennis because Garth was being an idiot several times, but I don't know if we've ever talked about Warren Ellis. That being said, he has written Constantine and several other occult featuring books, so he's kind of an old hat, which does explain why Castlevania is so fucking good.
Okay, moving on.
And I do know that making the Castlevania series for Netflix was kind of his idea, because he had originally pitched the 4-part season 1 of Castlevania as just a movie, and then he was going to make a trilogy of Castlevania movies, which amounted to the first and second season of Castlevania. Although I'm glad he now has more excuse to further the story, because as we both know, Dracula is dead, but because this is Castlevania and this is Dracula we're talking about, he will not remain so, especially not with Isaac being a kind of sycophantic follower of his. No offense to him.
And I always have a hard time remembering which one is which. Hector is like the not blue hair one, but is the one with hair, while Isaac is the one who's bald, right?
Yeah. Hector is the one who is kind of selective about what he wants to do to the humans, and is obsessed with animals and resurrecting them. And Isaac is the one who was beaten for homosexual feelings and thus really, really fucking just hates the very concept of love itself. Which, again, not that I blame him, but I kind of side with Hector more, because he's just like, yeah, most humans are idiots, so why don't we just turn them into livestock? On most days when I give in to my misanthropy, that's sort of my approach. It's just like, yeah, most humans are fucking idiots, so let's save the ones that aren't fucking idiots and use the rest for, like, livestock. I'm good with that.
Okay. Jack-o'-lanterns or scarecrows or whatever. I'm just...
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Actual wizards. They team up to fight the forces of darkness with Dracula's estranged half-human son Alucard until they finally have almost all the playable characters from Castlevania 3. R.I.P. Grant Innes. The second season explores the motivations of the various generals Dracula has amassed while Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard sit around in a library arguing like a bunch of...
Okay, points for knowing about the Castlevania games well enough to know about Grant and Esty. That being said, I do want Grant and Esty in season 3 because they need to be there. Though I can't imagine what a thief and a mechanist are going to do for the rest of the team. Well, I guess there's a hole in their squad now that Alucard is morbidly depressed for very good reasons. He watched his mother burn at the stake and had to kill his own father in the process of him trying to avenge her by killing all the humans. So, yeah, I'd be kind of fucked up too. Not to mention the fact that he matures at a accelerated rate and therefore is still technically a child.
Jesus Christ, that's one fucked up kid.
Yeah. The House Dracula was not a happy place to grow up in, I would imagine.
I think when he was actually a boy, it was with him, his mother, and his father.
Because we know that the events leading to her burning at the stake happened in Dracula's gap year, where he was traveling the world, quote, the way men do, slowly, unquote.
Well, yeah, at the time, yeah.
So he must have had a decent childhood, whilst mommy and daddy Dearest were still ludicrously in love. Like I'm honestly kind of picturing Dracula and Lisa's romance kind of like Gomez or Morticia. Like I imagine they were always in love with each other because that's just how that worked.
Yeah. So wait, how old is Alucard then? Because I'm assuming like what, he's like 16 or something?
I'd have to look at the dates of the time gap in the first Castlevania episode, because we know that there's a significant proportion of time in between when she first knocks on his door and when he gets back from his year of traveling the way men do, slowly. Sorry, that's just a great line for Dracula, for an immortal in general. So I think it's like 17 or 18 is the age they give him. I think. And we know that he matured extremely fast because he says kind of jokingly to Belmont when Belmont revealed that he was ousted from his home at 13 that Alucard says something to the effect of, "I'm surprised you have even less of a childhood than I did," but he's kind of joking, so who knows. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
I want to give me 1 second. I was trying to look up the age because it's an interesting question that popped in my head. All right.
Nerds. They finally find a way into Dracula's castle, kick some ass, and after a few attacks straight out of a Castlevania boss fight, Dracula surrenders his life to Alucard after realizing what a dick he's been. The first idea we found the show exploring but couldn't quite mold into a definitive thesis was on humanism. I give this one like an 8 out of 10. Warren Ellis is a...
Jack-o'-lanterns. There's not really much to say until they get into the bit here.
Yeah. Well, no, never mind. He'll give his definition.
Yeah, and I'm gonna take issue with his definition because it's not exactly complete, but we'll get into that in a second.
It's a self-confessed humanist, which is the belief in the value of a human being's own agency and autonomy. Humanists prize rationality and empiricism over superstition. As you might guess, humanists are not big fans of religion, and the Catholic Church is a frequent target with all their historic hatred of science and people choosing when and whom they want to have sex with.
Okay. Here's the thing. You are kind of skirting around the issue a bit there, aren't you, Jared? Because humanists ascribe value exclusively to human intelligence and agency, meaning that they don't believe in any kind of objective standard for value beyond that of human understanding. And that's why I'm not a humanist, because I'm not nihilistic enough to believe that humans create value from nowhere. Value needs to exist for us to detect it in the first place. As to the empiricism thing there, my issue with that, and again, why I'm not a humanist, is because empiricism is only one kind of knowledge. We'll get into this a little later when you get into the whole epistemology of all of this, but the belief that the world can exist with evidence but without logic is just facile. I always make the argument of it doesn't matter the materials you use to build a table if you don't use an appropriate blueprint to build that table, i.e., if you don't know the concept of a table, no amount of materialization of tables is going to make sense to you. Likewise, if you can't organize empirical data with logic, then you essentially have a pile of data that you can't organize in any meaningful way. In my opinion, both logic and empiricism are necessary facets of knowledge, but I order them in a sort of hierarchy where logic comes first and empiricism comes second. Just in the same way that the objects casting shadows come before the shadows that they're casting. I.e., something needs to be logical first before it can be empiricable. But like I said, you're going to get into epistemology and the theory of knowledge here in a second, so have at you, sir. Continue. Jack-o'-lanterns. Hello? Brainstormer.
Sorry, I went to go grab some more food.
Okay. But anyway,
Right.
proceed.
So it makes sense that Ellis put this theme in a show set in the 15th century because, let's be honest, it wasn't exactly the high point for the Catholic Church.
No one expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Ellis's humanism can be seen in the way science and humanity are portrayed as the true heroes of the story. One of the clever ways he accomplishes this is by taking your typical Christ-like traits and...
Okay, here's... I mentioned this was going to come back up again, and here it is coming back up. You are completely sidestepping something, aren't you, Jared? You forgot that the approach in Castlevania is not two-pronged. It's not just science versus religion. It's science, religion, and magic, all separate in their own little bubbles. This is why I give you some credit for what you're about to say later on in this episode, but I can't give it to you yet because we haven't gotten there. It's not about science. It's simply knowledge, and knowledge is not exclusive to science. This is why I'm not a humanist and why empiricism fails, because in a world without logic, empiricism is just data. You need logic before you can have data, because you have to have a world that exists and operates by parameters before you can have detectable outcomes of those parameters. Simply put. And again, like I said earlier, this fuck up of yours is mostly due to you completely, for some reason, sidestepping the literal interpretation of the medium you're critiquing. Because I know you know about occultism. You've done several videos on occultism, and I have my issues with those videos as well. That's a separate issue. But you know about magic and occultism. Ergo, you really should be applying at least some of that knowledge to a show where magic, science, and religion are all demonstrated to be three separate things. But because you can't do the literal interpretation for some reason, and everything needs to be a metaphor for something else, you just rope magic into science as though they're completely indistinguishable, even though Castlevania itself as a show goes to great lengths to separate them. Yes, Lisa goes to Dracula for science, but it's made very clear that Dracula is a polymath, i.e., he knows more than one thing. He specializes in more than one type of knowledge. And even he can and does regularly draw the distinction between science and magic. It's not a case of Clark's Law. If Clark's Law was the case, we wouldn't have him exploding into a pillar of fire and then basically doing the Wizard of Oz thing in the ashes of his dead wife. That was the moment that I knew I was gonna like Castlevania the series, because I thought for a while, I think like you did, that they were going for the Arthur C. Clarke method of this shit. But that was promptly screwed over by the existence of Dracula being able to do that shit, and also Sypha being able to do the things that she does. That's not psychism. There's no telepathy there. It's explained very clearly that they are manipulating spiritual and metaphysical forces. No science involved. That would fall not under empiricism, but under the or rather a more direct version of what I've been touting for most of this rant, which is rationalism. Because it's not about science, it's not about humanism, it's simply about knowledge versus authority. The church has a lot of authority, and that has given their knowledge legitimacy, but a lot of their knowledge is not practical. Whereas someone like the Belmonts have a lot of practical knowledge, but no authority, and therefore they're not allowed to do the things because the church fears and loathes that their knowledge essentially would validate something that's not Christian. So they suppress actual practical metaphysical knowledge for the sake of authority. And that leads to moments like the priest being face to face with a demon. Why? Because even though a demon would not be able to enter a house of God if they had actually performed the right purifications, cleansing, and protection spells, they didn't do that. And so, in the immortal words of the demon from Castlevania Season 1, this is an empty box. God is not here. Not because God doesn't exist, but because they actually failed to put God in the box in the first place. They didn't sanctify their church because they didn't actually know the sanctification spells they would need to do that. Essentially, if anything, the magics of Castlevania demonstrate a need for practical knowledge, even about things like rationalism and metaphysics. And that's one of the reasons why I loved Castlevania Season 1. Which, by the way, if any of this is sounding interesting to you, I have done a video where I talked about Castlevania Season 1. I do intend to fully get around to a Castlevania Season 2 video, and I probably will do one for Season 2 and one for Season 3 whenever Season 3 comes out. Because the research for my take on Season 2 took longer than I thought, and I had some personal bullshit and some sleep deprivation issues. So that's that. Moving on.
I did want to say that scene in the church with the priest and the demon. Wow.
scene in the fucking show. I know. It's so fucking awesome.
There was actually a joke that I remember watching, like this reactor react to that episode. Where the demon says, "Let me kiss you."
Mhm.
The joke was, if that's how he kisses, I'd hate to see him suck dick. That's juvenile humor, I know.
Yeah, but I love everything, positively everything about that scene. Like, fuck. That scene is everything that is beautiful in that series. It's just because it so perfectly encapsulates the difference between those three things. I.e., like I said, the church isn't empty because there is no God. It's empty because you didn't put God in the box like you should have, essentially. So it's an empty box, and an empty box doesn't keep out shit. You should have learned protection spells, but you were so afraid of magical knowledge that you purged your narratives of it.
Okay. Jack-o'-lanterns?
Moving on.
Giving them to humans. For example, as a scientist, Lisa wants to learn from Dracula so she can heal the sick, not unlike the miracles of Jesus. When she burns on the cross, she begs Dracula to forgive the people because they know not what they do, reflecting Jesus' famous words on the cross.
They don't know what they're doing.
She wasn't on a cross, she was on a pyre. No,
Well,
that's nitpicking. That's nitpicking. I'm not trying to nitpick.
to be fair to Jared, in the game that this is based on, which I believe is Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, it was actually a cross. So he might have just assumed it was a cross and not been looking closely enough. Or maybe it is a cross and we just haven't been looking closely enough. I would enjoy that that reference if they do that. Although I do also enjoy her just burning at the stake because reference.
Okay, just to be clear, that the burning of the stake thing, that's an actual real thing. It's not just some Hollywood made up thing that.
No, they did that. They did that to a lot of people. Although, to be fair to the Salem witch trials, and I can't believe that sentence just passed my list without me bursting into flames. Most of the witches that witches in air quotes, that they found were hung rather than burned. See, the logic, and again, I use that term extremely loosely, was if you didn't burn or otherwise dismember or dispose of a witch's body properly, they would rise from the dead or their ghost would haunt you. So the only way to get rid of them permanently and send them to where they quote unquote belonged was burning at the stake. Although later on, especially in like the 1600s, it became sort of lax in that notion, and they thought that no, we can just hang them. As long as we don't bury them in sanctified ground, it won't matter. So as a result, the majority of the victims of the Salem witch trial were not buried in cemeteries because cemeteries were considered sanctified church ground, and proper burials were considered for Christians only because Puritans were fucking terrible.
Yeah, no, I get it. Jesus.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that kind of makes me hate being a Christian.
I would say there's no reason to hate being a Christian as long
It's more
as
of the people that I find in history that give our religion a bad name.
Yeah, and to be fair, every religion has those. That being said, most of the time when pagans fought over shit, it wasn't over religion, it was over territory. And their gods only fought in the sense of they would both pray to their gods for victory, and obviously one of them must have won because, one of the sides won. But for the most part, and this is actually one of the things I actually love about the late Roman Empire before it converted to Christianity. When Romans would invade or conquer an area, they wouldn't stop people from practicing whatever their current religion was. And in actuality, they would go out of their way to look for similarities between their gods and other pantheons of gods. For example, probably the most famous example, when the Greeks and the Romans found Egypt, they looked at the Greek god of wisdom, Thoth, who is probably my favorite deity, and they compared him to the Greek god of medicine, magic, and trickery, Hermes. And so they sort of just assumed, hey, maybe our gods would get along, or maybe your god is just a different face of our god. So maybe they're the same being in some broad sense. And as a result, in Alexandria in particular, you had basically the best bits of every culture coexisting side by side and kind of intermingling. That's why you often see in late Roman temples that might be devoted to like Venus or Aphrodite, for example, would also occasionally be devoted to like Isis. Isis was considered to be sort of associated with Athena and Aphrodite, both at different times. Of course, Isis in the Egyptian pantheon was the goddess of fucking everything at one point, because she just it's a complete sidebar. If we ever talk about something Egyptian, I'll have to go on about that. But whereas what I was getting to, whereas when Christians, when the Roman Empire converted to Christianity and they conquered a place, your gods were considered the devil, so fuck off. Basically, was the approach. And when that didn't work, they started okay, you can keep celebrating your traditions, but for the sake of church doctrine, this is what this means now. Which, incidentally, they did with Halloween, but that's a separate thing we will get into tomorrow.
Probably. Okay. I'm not sure, like, again, like, I feel like, I'm sorry, I drank a lot and ate a lot, so I'm having, like, some burps and stuff.
Okay.
Right, but what I was going to say is that I feel, but I believe that kind of, is that he's going to draw up the thing I had mentioned earlier about, like, how I never got that religious thing from the show. It was just more of bad shit happened, and even more bad shit is happening because of the bad shit that happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that kind of vicious cycle thing.
I will say that the anti-religion thing is there. It's definitely there. I'm not gonna act like it's not there.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not there either. I'm just saying like it's more.
The approach that I got from it is not this particular religion is particularly bad. It's when people assume that their morality is correct against all argument, and they prefer their stories and their narratives over any kind of knowledge. That's bad, no matter who's doing it. That was sort of my take on it. In that way, I think Castlevania handled that very well, because it could have easily become the Christian suck hour, but it didn't. It became the don't use your morality as an excuse to stamp out knowledge, because you kind of need that, fucking idiots.
Mm-hmm.
And also, seeing the bishop eaten was amazingly cathartic, because that guy was testable in every conceivable way.
I gotta be honest, I kind of closed my eyes at that.
Which is funny, because of course they didn't really show much of anything. They just sort of implied that kiss was more thorough than it probably should have been. Lol.
Yeah, the worst part is my mind ran wild with what was happening.
Yep. In the immortal words of Alfred Hitchcock, there's nothing more frightening than an unopened door.
Or an open door and you don't see what's in the room.
Well, yeah, but the metaphor, of course, being that the human the human psyche can imagine worse things than any physical manifestation could possibly live up to.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Jack O'Lantern.
In contrast to the church, where ordained men with the knowledge of God need to shepherd the ignorant flock, Lisa believes knowledge should be shared with humanity for everyone's benefit. Despite being set long before the Enlightenment, her kind of thinking would be found in philosophers like David Hume and his treatise on human nature, or Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Emile.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's just I paused there at a moment with his face. It's kind of funny.
Okay, yeah. But that being as it may, first of all, Rousseau was kind of the beginning of the end for the Enlightenment, because his social contract theory led to the everything is a social construct bullshit that we currently find ourselves oh so enamored with. And you'll bring up Michel Foucault later, and I have even harsher words to say about that. But just as a nitpick, really, even though I think Lisa probably would have shared her knowledge, she didn't explicitly intend to share it. She specifically intended to use it to help people. That doesn't necessarily imply giving it to everyone, like democratically or universally. That implies her taking the knowledge and using it to help people, yes, but it doesn't imply it. You know what I'm saying? Like, she would, just because she was a doctor doesn't mean she's going to sit down and have a long-winded medical lecture in her hut or what have you. And again, I feel like you're focusing a little bit too heavily on the science aspect of Dracula's knowledge, because I would venture to say probably a good 80% of his knowledge was actually mystical in nature. And that there's nothing wrong with that, because Dracula is a polymath, but you kind of appear to be over fixating on the science in order to make your humanism point of view work. And that's
You know what's weird? When I thought of humanism, I watched like the first minute or so of this, and then I just popped because I knew we were going to cover this, and I didn't want to watch anymore because I wanted to have like genuine reaction and talks and stuff.
Yeah.
When I heard the word humanist, for some reason I just thought of someone who believed in the good of humanity and just the kind of idea that humans are like inherently good and things like that.
That's like the most layman explanation of humanism, but there are, like he said and like I said, sort of caveats to that, in that they believe that humans are the source of value judgments, and that they focus explicitly on empirical rationality as opposed to rationalistic rationality.
A part of me thinks I might have been thinking of humanitarian. Something like
that. There is a meaningful distinction between humanism and humanitarianism.
Yeah. So
just like there's a distinction between femininity and feminism.
Yeah, I've never really put much stuff in philosophy. I've looked into certain types of philosophy, but I've never really had one definitive course of philosophy for myself.
No, and me either. I obviously have a fairly coherent personal philosophy, but none of my personal philosophies correspond 100% to one framework or another. Like,
Yeah.
I just went on a long ramble about preferring rationalistic knowledge to empirical knowledge in like a hierarchical way. But most rationalists, like pure rationalists, say that logic is the only kind of way to gain knowledge, and that empiricism doesn't matter. I fundamentally disagree with that. I think that in a lot of ways, empiricism is an extension of rationalism, but that doesn't mean that the core of it doesn't matter. Like I always use the example of like, yes, you can make judgments of things based on the shadows that they cast on the walls, but it would be more efficient to just look at the actual things casting the shadows. Likewise, yes, empiricism is an outcome of logic, but there's only so much truth you can gain just by looking at the empiricism of things. You have to, at some point, organize that empirical data using logic. Therefore, logic takes priority on some level.
Yeah. Again, it's just my. Actually, no, I got nothing. It's Jack-o'-lantern.
Yeah. If you ever want to look into philosophy more, I can recommend you some good books. Because, of course, I spent 3 years studying it academically and several years before that studying it just in my free time. So I kind of
I still have to get the books you recommended me on magic.
yes, yes, you should definitely do that, both for your story and so that when I go on a magical ramble, you'll at least have some idea what I'm saying, which is always nice.
Honestly, I think I like your ramblings more than anything I would read.
I don't know. Maybe you'll start reading the books I gave you and you'll start having like your own opinions on magic. That would be fascinating, and I honestly would be kind of proud because I've only ever tried to take an apprentice once before. Well, sort of one and a half times. I tentatively tried to teach my cousin some of it once, and he was over it in about 2 months. But it would be kind of interesting to see you sort of develop your own opinions on magic from my resources. And I taught myself from books and things. I didn't have a teacher, so it would be kind of interesting to see if I could help you learn things because of all of the many years of study that I have done and actually put it to some use. But that's wishful thinking on my part and completely irrelevant to the task at hand, so jack-o'-lanterns.
Mm-hmm. One moment. Okay. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Or on education, both central to humanist thought. This belief that shared knowledge can help mankind is also contrasted in both the Belmont Library and Dracula's accumulated knowledge, which are treated as precious things to be guarded. A big part of humanism reflected in the show is altruism and love for your fellow man. It's
Okay, once again, I'm gonna have to fill up philosophy Spurg all over this. Okay, so here's the problem. Humanism, because it's a statement on the nature of value more than anything, led to humanist moral frameworks. One of those humanist moral frameworks was hedonism, which basically reduced the most good that can be done is the greatest degree of pleasure for the greatest degree of people. It's kind of somewhat duplicitous to say that humanists have a monopoly on altruism because there are plenty of other philosophies that have altruistic tendencies, and it's also kind of duplicitous to not mention the utilitarian or hedonistic properties of humanism because, again, that's one of my main issues with humanism because I'm not a hedonist or a utilitarianist. I think that value needs to exist beyond A, simply the pleasure or pain that something brings, and B, the usefulness that it has. So you kind of are glossing over a very important philosophical distinction, and yes, 90% of people aren't going to know or care, and they're probably not going to catch it, but I am not 90% of people. I am someone who can actually call you on your bullshit as when bullshit needs to be called. And sir, on the idea that humanists invented altruism, I call such bullshit. And on that note, on we move with the Jack-o'-lantern.
Sec.
Because of his love for his mother and her love for people, that Alucard teams up with Sypha and Belmont to defend the humans and even kill his own father.
Because it is what my mother would have wanted.
Sypha's love for people is what motivates her to fight, while it's Trevor's lack of family that makes him the wandering alcoholic that we see. But Trevor is...
I don't know if I would say the speaker's love for people is what motivates them. I think their love for wisdom motivates them, and their understanding via that wisdom that knowledge should be used for people's benefits is more so what causes Sypha to fight, because she sees the value in humans, yes, but I don't think she sees it exclusively. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gotten horribly offended by the idea of someone calling her a witch, and felt the need to correct them like an adolescent Hermione Granger, which, again, as an occultist, I'm perfectly okay with. That was one of her most awesome moments in the show, as far as I'm concerned. But if she were a strict humanist, not only would she have a very hard time believing in magic, but she probably wouldn't have gotten offended by someone else calling her a witch, because she probably wouldn't validate his moral framework. But obviously, she believes in some standard of value beyond human creation, or she wouldn't have gotten offended by that. Not to mention that a lot of her knowledge comes from biblical sources, and she even knows how to speak Adamic, which is supposedly the first language that Adam spoke. So that kind of shits on your whole humanist point, doesn't it? Moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
later convinced to give up his misanthropic ways because of his feelings for Sypha.
In the short time we have known each other, you have rediscovered yourself.
The villains in the show are also motivated by love, or at least the lack of it. Dracula losing his wife is the inciting factor of the whole show. The two characters were this motivation of love, or...
Okay. For one thing, Dracula's approach to things is probably most closely approximated with nihilism, which, while humanism kind of by necessity leads to nihilism in a lot of circumstances, I don't think you can give humanism the credit for nihilism. I think they're related philosophies, because once you say that there is no standard for logic, that there is no objective standard for either logic or value beyond the human mind, then it essentially begins the notion that the human mind is the only thing of value in the universe, and therefore value doesn't meaningfully exist in the universe. Therefore, we get to say whatever value is that we want. It's essentially a must-subjectivity argument. It's the very beginning of everything that I despise about Western philosophy. The idea that, well, if value doesn't exist, then we can just make value whatever we want it to be, is just complete bullshit. And personally, I think it's kind of ludicrous for you to invoke humanism in this case, because Dracula A wants to eliminate all of the humans, and B, Sypha and Trevor and Alucard don't defend humanity because of some shared humanity complex. Like, it's not as though all humanity is a collective and therefore we need to respect all humans. It's humans are good, therefore we should defend the humans, and the forces of evil are evil, therefore we should not put up with the evils of Dracula. It's really a lot more classical and a lot more simple than you're making it to fit this humanist agenda of yours here, or at least this humanist framework. I'm not going to say that you have a humanist agenda because very clearly, while I think you are probably quite attached to this philosophy, if I had to guess, you're not forcing it. You're just misinterpreting and oversimplifying for the sake of making it fit. So you have my sympathies, but you're also wrong. And fuck you. Jack-o'-lantern.
Lack of it is most important isn't Isaac and Hector, the two humans who side with the vampires. They both hate humanity enough to want to see it destroyed purely because a love they once had was taken. Hector's beloved animals were always killed by humans, and the man Isaac loved turned that love against him.
Well, I love you too.
Okay, I think he's kind of. Well, he is
okay.
wrong about Hector. He's wrong about Hector.
Yeah, it's not because his animals die that he hates humanity. He hates humanity because he has the skills to resurrect things, and humans, being kind of dipshits, are horrified by that because ooh, necromancy is evil. We don't need to understand the thing because it's just bad, right? Yeah, well, yes, his love for animals is a motivation of his, and his hatred of humanity is a motivation of his. The two are really incidental to each other. They don't cause one another. They just exist in the same being for the sake of human complexity and shit. Essentially, Hector is the more adult equivalent of Newt Scamander, and that's something I've always found funny. As for Isaac, yeah, I don't think that his lost love leads him to hatred of humanity. I think the fact that Dracula saved him and used knowledge to help him caused him to look at the world in a very detached and hyper-rational manner, which leaves no room for human compassion, and that's what leads to his hatred for humanity. I.e., for both Hector and Isaac, it's not a emotion. It's not fundamentally an emotional assertion they're making when they're making their opuses about hating humanity. They have looked at humanity and they've taken into account their shitty lives, yes, but it's not as though someone hurt me, so now I hate all the humans. That's extremely short-sighted of you to try and make that comparison. It's this bad thing happened to me, and it appears to me intellectually that is symptomatic of a larger problem, and based on that larger problem, humanity are a bunch of dipshits, and I don't like the majority of them.
I will be honest. I'm sorry. Please finish the thought, then I'll say my piece.
But even then, in Hector's case, he still allowed for individual humans to not be terrible. That's why he makes the let's just turn them into cattle compromise with Dracula, or tries to. Isaac, you could make the argument that his straight up hatred for humanity is more to do with his lost love, but I would argue that that's more him displacing his lost love onto Dracula. It's very clear that as far as it's possible for someone who's been through that level of trauma to have those kinds of feelings, Isaac has a thing for Dracula to the point that he would sacrifice himself. Why? Because he has replaced all of the pain and all of the loss of his emotional love with a respectable intellectual love for Dracula, which he is very obviously repressing an emotional element of. But yeah, neither of them has gone full nihilist because emotions. It's infinitely more complicated than that.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I didn't know. I never saw it that way. I just saw Isaac as being good friends with Dracula. I mean, I assume that's it. That's a part of it, and I never really saw like like kind of love or anything.
Well, I will admit that's kind of my interpretation of it, but
I mean, it makes sense when I really now look back on it.
yeah,
It's just
but
I didn't
but
think he was gay. That's the thing. He was a person in my eyes.
right, but they kind of make the fact that he's gay a little bit explicit vis-a-vis the whipping scene. So I didn't think it was a very hard stretch. Basically,
I did notice. I did notice. I thought I just
okay. I'm not going to mock you for not noticing that.
no. I will mock myself. I am super blind, which, ironically enough, is why I have glasses.
To be fair, I have optic nerve damage, and I'm technically legally blind, but have not yet legally taken the diagnosis, so I'm in the same boat. My biggest problem is that glasses won't help, which unfortunately took us way more years than it should have to figure the fuck out.
But yeah, I agree with everything you've said about Isaac, and I think his Jared's interpretation is very much narrow and glossing over certain aspects and stuff.
It's oversimplified. I'm sure if you asked him, he would probably go, "Yeah, that makes sense." But
Yeah.
and this is one of my problems with Wisecrack. They start from the premise of this has to have an abstract meaning, not a literal one, which I think is wrong. And then they mold the facts to suit the theories rather than using the theories to fit the facts.
I'll be honest. I don't watch a lot of stuff with Jared. I prefer like the Thug Notes and the Earthling Cinema stuff.
Yeah, Thug Notes is kind of hilarious, especially because I have read most of the original versions, and I kind of just enjoy his take on Thug Notes. I watched Jared whenever Wisecrack covers something that I like. Like there are two in particular that I intend to someday do response videos to on my channel, where he talks about Grant Morris and Alan Moore as they pertain to magic. And, and they kind of like I hate to sound all intellectually superior and shit, but there are times when you walk into a room and you just want to shout, "Everybody's wrong. Fuck all of y'all." And those were kind of those videos for me. It was just like, okay, you're describing Alan and Grant's approaches to these things well, but you're not actually describing the concepts themselves well, and it really fucking annoys me. Because while I love all forms of magic, I am quite partial to Hermeticism, and at least in the Alan Moore one, and to a lesser extent in the Grant Morrison one, he kind of says some bullshit about Hermeticism that I feel the need to correct. But that's an issue for another day. Moving right along.
Actually, before we do go, what we're saying, Jacqueline, we have 10 minutes and 7 seconds left of this video.
And how long is the video overall?
15 minutes and 7 seconds.
Okay, so we've only gotten through 5 minutes. Wow.
And we are near an hour and a half.
Okay, so we'll be done probably at about midnight. So it's probably going to be the length of a usual show.
Yeah, pretty much. Huh. Okay.
Assuming that there isn't infinitely more to talk about once we get to the latter parts, which might be the case, especially with the theory of knowledge shit coming up, because that was kind of one of my specialties in school. So, or that was,
I will say though,
an area of particular interest for me.
I will say though, is that Isaac was one of my favorite characters of season 2, but not on a philosophical degree. It's just more of like the sympathy for the character I had.
Yeah, I love both Hector and Isaac, and it's sad how much I related to them. I think Hector more so because, like I said, I don't want to. My approach is most of humanity is shit, but there are individual humans that I can get along
On
with.
a philosophical degree, I agree more with Hector than Isaac, but I think in terms of like kind of tragic backstories that have led them to have those philosophies, I think I have more. I'm drawn more to Isaac.
Yeah, and I feel I feel like there's probably a bunch of Isaac and Dracula like fan art on the internet because
Uh, Honestly,
the
I feel like Isaac would be very interesting to try and have a philosophical talk with on his like kind of thought process on the thing, and instead of Hector, because like I said, I agree with Hector more than Isaac. So it's like one of those fictional characters you would have, you feel like you would have an interesting conversation with.
I feel like um Isaac and I probably wouldn't get along because he would be very hardline in his nihilism, and I would try to coax him into believing in valuable things, and he would just have none of it. Although Isaac does have probably the most ironic or most facepalm inducing moment in the entire show, which is when when he senses Sifa's magic. He says someone stinks of magic, and I'm like, dude, you're a forge master. That is literally a form of necromancy. What the fuck are you on about? Like, of all the hypocritical bullshit to although I do wish we could have seen one of the forge masters versus Sypha. That would have been interesting.
Yeah,
That was probably my biggest missed opportunity for season 2 is I want at least one of the forge masters versus Sypha. I also think Sypha learning to be a forge master would be interesting.
yeah.
Because it's not like it's not a kind of knowledge that she can gain. So why not? But anyway, moving on.
I thought you were going to say it.
Jack-o'-lanterns. There we go.
That's why I do this. This is how I love you.
The reverse is shown to be a redeeming quality too. The show argues that love is the single most humanizing and dehumanizing force in the world. And while we find it hard to argue with that sentiment,
Okay, small point, but I don't think the show argues that. I think it just betrays the possibility of that. See, this is the other thing. Because you reduce things down so much and don't allow for literal or straightforward interpretations very much, Jared, you kind of censor at least a good portion of the arguments, if there are any, that shows are trying to make. And so when you present that shows are making arguments, you kind of miss the point by about 1.5 miles. And as a result, you don't have anything to cover with Castlevania, and hence why you're making this video a half-baked video as opposed to a full-fledged case study like you usually do. Because if you had just allowed for the literalistic interpretation of things and gone maybe a little bit into the occult nature of magic in the series, like I did, shameless plug, I did a Castlevania video where I talked about the relationship between the science, the religion, and the magic. So if anyone's interested in that, go and watch.
Well, you also have to realize this is technically also one of your channels too. So plug away if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, on my main channel, I covered Castlevania Season 1. I'm getting to Season 2, but it's taking forever because the magics of Castlevania Season 2 are a little bit more complex, and I'm trying to dumb them down enough to where I'm not going to alienate people, but not so much that I'm going to miss crucial information. That being said, on we move so that he can move to the next possible topic.
Okay.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
and there's just not much.
Ah, crap.
Isn't it nice when you can keep things simple?
Fucking ads.
Oh, boy.
curse you ads. There. That felt good.
Hold on, let me move that back to. Okay.
Mint, there's just not much more to say. The second pitch we explored was on the organization of knowledge. Now, we're going to give this one like a 6 out of 10. The idea is basically what it sounds like. It refers to the different ways we arrange and store the stuff we know, and these different methods are central to the show's conflict. Let's start off by looking at a prominent theme in season 2.
I'll be right back.
Here's the thing, Jared. You appear to have missed a massive opportunity here in terms of this topic, because you drew the line for whatever reason about the organization of knowledge rather than talking about what's referred to as epistemology, or the nature of knowledge, i.e., what kinds of knowledge are valid forms of knowledge and which are not. As I said, my approach is all forms of knowledge are valid forms of knowledge. It just matters where they're applied and in what subject matter. But most people pick and choose whether they prefer rationalism or empiricism rather than finding the necessary happy medium that I think I have at least attempted to find. But you really could have tied this in with your humanist commentary if perhaps you had just taken the literal interpretation, because this is the fundamental thing you missed out on by sidestepping the magical aspect of it, because you could have talked about how magic in Castlevania appears to be a rationalistic kind of knowledge versus an empirical kind of knowledge, which, you know, follows the quote-unquote true science, as they refer to it in Castlevania. And if you had done that, maybe you could have juxtaposed the humanist elements with the epistemological elements, and you would have had a full series, a full commentary on the series. The problem is you would have had to split your commentary into multiple bits, unless you were smart enough to figure out that epistemology and humanism are related in particularly the medieval context as presented in the show, and the fantasy context presented in the show. And it probably would have been one of your best videos if you had just been smart enough to not draw the line at the organization knowledge, but go into straight up epistemology, into the nature of knowledge. Because if anything, Castlevania shows that, at least in regards to the premise of Castlevania, there are multiple kinds of valid forms of knowledge, i.e., it's not as simple as one kind of knowledge or another kind of knowledge. Multiple kinds of knowledge are valid. You even missed out on the opportunity to point out the autodidactive nature of Dracula's polymathy, because he's, you know, self-taught and acquires knowledge himself rather than in an academic context, which you could have tied into your commentary on the appeals to authority that the church make. You really could have just done like a quasi-juxtapo of medieval philosophical history if you wanted to with Castlevania. It's one of the things that makes Castlevania so great, but you completely missed it, and for some reason are shoving humanism and organization of knowledge into two separate categories rather than combining them somehow with epistemology, which would have saved you a lot of time and would have let you cover a quite vast and interesting swath of history there. But then again, I guess, very ironically indeed, what the fuck do I know? He said, fully aware of the epistemological irony. Lol. And now we wait for Brainstormer. Boys and girls of every age, would you...
Alright, I'm here. Okay. I am back. Hold on. Let me turn off these annotations. Okay.
Okay.
1. Science versus religion. Lisa is burned at the stake by the church because she was a scientist, and for the church, any science they don't understand is clearly witchcraft. Then
Oh, wait, no.
there's Saifa and the Speakers, a nomadic group who bear some resemblance to the Romani people, or Roma, an itinerant group who were dispersed throughout Europe in the Dark Ages.
So, gypsies.
Yes. And Jared, my dude, you're right there. You're right there about to make the connection. Why will you not make the very obvious connection you should currently be making if you know those two things or those three things? And
He
once
might.
again, Huh?
Well, he might know because, I stopped the video, so.
well, I just watched this. He doesn't address it or get into it. So I'm going to once again have to spurg all over this, but such
Go
is my thing. Point being, Jared, you once again are sidestepping the nature of magic in Castlevania. Yes, the church thinks that science and magic are synonymous with each other, but the thing that Castlevania makes very clear is the only reason why the church thinks that is because they are ignorant of how either works. And as a result, they conflate the two even though they are separate forces. This was a tour de force for the show because it is a distinction that very few shows meaningfully can make, or that very few shows meaningfully do make. And it's one of the reasons why I love it so much, because they successfully managed to define the limits of religion, science, and magic, and don't thoroughly invalidate any of the three. But you had to reduce this down by getting rid of magic in this equation, and therefore tried to make it into a science versus magic dichotomy, when in actuality, what you should have done is, as I said, go about the nature of epistemology, and instead of creating this this narrative or superstition versus empiricism dichotomy you've made, you could compare and contrast the nature of practical rationalistic knowledge versus practicable empirical knowledge. If you had done that, you could have gone into the history of, these various kinds of knowledge in the medieval conception of the human mind and the human soul and things like that. And if you know the speakers are a surrogate for the Romani, and fair enough, it's a thing I noticed too, I'm not going to bash you for it, that would have been your perfect way to start talking about the nature of magic in Castlevania. But for some, you've completely fucking sidestepped magic because in your mind it must be an analogy for something rather than a representative of itself for its own sake. And I don't know why you do this, because you very clearly know that occultism is a thing, or at the very least that it is a philosophy. Whether it has applicability or not in your mind, I don't know. But you very clearly do know that magic and occultism are things. So why are you shoving magic into the it must be a metaphor for something hole, when in actuality all that does is make your commentary less substantive? Now your Romani reference is just an interesting sidebar, where when it could have tied together your first point and your second point and actually made this a cohesive philosophical demonstration you could have made. But I guess fuck me then, because you didn't do that. Jack-o'-lanterns.
One moment. Okay.
And largely remain so today. The speakers go from town to town spreading their message of altruism and offering aid to those in need.
I told you it was necessary to offer aid to the people.
Like many nomadic people throughout the ages, their histories and tradition are oral, meaning they have no written language to record their past.
My father was...
Okay, yes. Again, you really should have gone about this by bringing up epistemology rather than simply the organization of knowledge, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. However, you do not get points from me for this because you didn't talk about how knowledge is stored in an oral tradition. You didn't talk about the nature of oral traditions or the nature of storing information in non-physical format via mind palaces or anything. If you're going to talk about these things, actually go into them. If you're not going to talk about these things, then leave them out and talk about something else. But pick one, please. Because you could have easily actually taught somebody something by bringing up mind palaces in this instance of how in the Middle Ages, before reading and writing were common practice, people did keep their knowledge in what essentially amount to mind palaces of their own creation. But I don't fucking know why you didn't. Like, I half think you're still harping on the humanism thing, and you're trying to somehow weave these together, but you're not seeing the very obvious way that you could do that by allowing for a more literalistic, straightforward interpretation of the media. And that just goes to show your shortcomings of not seeing things literal when they're very clearly intended, at least by the media itself, to be somewhat literal. I don't fucking care if Warren Ellis said it's not supposed to be literal, because artists can create things they don't realize they're creating all the fucking time. Just because the writer or author or painter is the first authority on a piece of art, that doesn't mean they're the only authority on a piece of art, or that they are the most thorough authority on a piece of art. In order to be the authority on a type of knowledge, you need to actually, I don't know what's the phrase, think, Jared. I'm realizing that I'm getting unnecessarily cross with you, but this is your job, and it is also to some extent my job. So I'm essentially proofreading you as one philosophically inclined individual to another. And as it happens, this is kind of exactly my specialization, because I am a practicing occultist and a philosophy student. So, yeah. You walked right into my wheelhouse and you started completely failing at basic shit. So I'm here to correct you at your failures at basic shit.
So I have a question about the whole oral history thing.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it a thing?
Because reading and writing were very expensive luxuries that most people didn't have access to. And so the skill of reading and writing didn't flourish among the populace, partially because the upper classes didn't want it to, and partially because there were other ways of conveying knowledge and wisdom that didn't require excessive amounts of reading and writing. For example, apprenticeships or memorization techniques like the Mind Palace, like I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And again, Jared, you could have mentioned monks. I don't know how you managed to talk about a medieval story about the organization of knowledge and not mention any of the interesting facts about monks during the Middle Ages, because monks were the historians, scholars, philosophers, magicians, and all of the above of the Middle Ages for a very, very long time. It's a large part of why we even have pre-Christian information anymore, is because monks found it so interesting that they had to preserve it in some way. I'm just saying, you could have made a really interesting series of historical points that would have added up to a very interesting overall dissection of the series, and you didn't. And it perturbed me as someone who also specializes in this particular area, and this particular area in particular.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
Let's got into a fight with one.
True speakers do not fight. when he tried to convince the speaker to have your oral history transcribed on paper.
Their knowledge is kept and organized by elders, passing teachings and stories down from generation to generation. Because of this, Cyphus people are the custodians of knowledge that has otherwise been lost to history.
Okay, yes, and again, right about here is where you would have gone into memorization techniques from the Middle Ages, possibly the history of monks. Wandering friars would have been good. You could have gone back to the Romani and made a connection with them as well, other than the fact that they just have an oral tradition. Like, you could have gone into folk medicine and folk magic, and, once again, tied in the shit that you appear to be purposefully omitting at this point. Like, this could have been so much more interesting and more thorough than it is, and it annoys me that you just jump from one thing to another without a care in the world and then wonder why your analyses are half-baked. Because in your mind, it appears to be that in actuality, things can only be about one thing at a time rather than several things. Or that things need to be strictly straightforward as long as they're not literal, which is just baffling. Because call me crazy, but when I examine something, I prefer to look at it in literal terms first, even art. Because otherwise, I feel like a fucking moron. And I wonder why that could be, given what we've seen so far, Jared. You just barely miss very obvious shit, and it's kind of embarrassing, dude.
Also, keep in mind that sci-fi even points out the kind of problems that do arise.
Yeah, he gets into that later. I'm not gonna give him shit for that yet.
Well, no, I just wanted to point that out because it's actually it's a pretty funny scene.
Yeah, although I will say that season 1 was much better than season 2, in my opinion.
Yeah, because I think the protagonist. Actually, I don't even think. I'm not even sure who really is the protagonist of the story in the first 2 seasons.
See, I think the main protagonist is Trevor because we spend most of the time humanizing him.
Mhm. I think season two has the problem that it focuses too much on the quote unquote villains.
See, I don't see that as a problem. In fact, I would have just preferred season 2 be entirely about Dracula and company, and then had a third season focus on what Sypha and gang and Trevor and Alucard were doing while the generals were planning, and then we could have had season 4 be all about the raid of the castle. Imagine if instead of trying to cram it all into 2 episodes, they had done the final big bad battle in an entire season. How awesome that would have been.
That actually would have been pretty cool. Kind of to draw a comparison, maybe the siege of Lord of the Rings, siege of
Helm's Deep.
Helm's Deep, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it would have been cool, and not only would it have been cool, but it would have been a nice analogy for the levels of a video game. Because, of course, every video game in this style has a dungeon level that it's your job to navigate through. Hence, games like Dungeons and Dragons, which
Yeah, and
most of the shit.
And it'd be a good nod to the fans who played the games.
Yeah, and it's not as though Castlevania is adverse to doing that, because when they revealed the Morningstar Whip in season 2, they straight up did a video game unlock sequence.
Oh, by the way, folks, Banzeres!
Yes, that service is cool.
Huh?
Though I would have liked more of an analysis on the actual Morningstar Whip, and I think when I do my video, I might provide one. Because the fact that it's called the Morningstar Whip actually opens up some interesting doors, occultism wise. So look out for that when I get back to doing videos on my channel, folks.
Okay. Jack-o'-lanterns?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
This one has the Adamical roots and some of the structure of high remembrance, I think. Give.
I haven't heard of Adamic.
The speaker's oral tradition might explain why Sypha is able to use a type of magic that other humans can't. Like the speakers, the Belmonts have passed down their family knowledge from generation to generation, but they prefer writing it down in books.
Okay.
Okay, Jared. I've been trying to be very nice to you about this and not be as mean as I usually am in these video responses. But what you just said is a massive facepalm moment. Because you just erased one of the things that Castlevania gets more right than most fantasy shows. Namely, magic is a skill that anyone can learn. There is nothing particularly special about Sypha. She is just specifically devoted to the knowledge of magic. Hence why she excels in the particular knowledge of magic. But it is her knowledge that gives her that power. It is not something that she specifically can do that others cannot. As evidenced by the fact that apparently the entire Belmont family knew the fucking Enochian seal thing. Which is a whole other barrel of kettles, which I'll be getting into in my season 2 review eventually, I think. But that's neither here nor there. As for Adamic, you really could have gone into some detail as to what Adamic is, if you were inclined to actually examining the occult aspects of Castlevania, as opposed to just erasing them for some reason. But yeah, fuck. As both a philosophy student and an occultist, Jared, fuck you for your. You have to be of a special kind of bloodline or some shit to wield magic. Fuck off. Magic is a skill anyone can learn. It's just really, really, really fucking hard.
Actually, this actually brings up an interesting question, and it is a full sidebar, mind you, but I did want to ask this. Is it curses? Is that, I know that that can happen to anyone, but a certain type of curse, can it be passed down from generation to generation?
If the curse is meant to affect like an entire family, yeah, you can make a curse that follows a bloodline or something like that. That being said, it would be extremely vindictive and extremely stupid to do that. But it can be done. Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious because overall I don't think it's a bad thing. Like in terms of storytelling, I think it's fine to have that kind of thing where it's like certain bloodlines or things, but I think you have to make sure
the easiest way to explain that is via blood magic, i.e., you attach a specific energy to someone's bloodline, and then wherever that bloodline flows, so too does the energy of the curse, and then something like that. But again, it would be curses in general are extremely vindictive and stupid, and usually self-destructive, because if you cast a curse wrong, it can come back on you, and that's never pleasant.
Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Jack-o'-lantern?
Jack-o'-lantern.
Okay. I will say, though, that the design of the Belmont Hold is fucking awesome.
Yes, it is. I wanted to get lost in there for many hours. Same thing with Dracula's library. I was just like, can I go to there, and how long can I stay there if I can go to there?
A part of me just wants, like, for Dracula's castle, a part of me just wants to walk around and see how far, just see how long before I actually get lost, or if I can actually make a full round trip the castle.
I'd be kind of interested in just going and visiting like Dracula, hopefully before Lisa got, burned at stake and shit. Because
well, again, my thing is I just like to take in the place itself before I get into like the meat and potatoes of it.
I
guess.
I'd enjoy doing that, but I'd also enjoy just talking to Dracula and Hector and Isaac. I imagine that if I existed at that time in that universe, I would probably be a Forge Master.
Honestly, I would prefer to be walking around it when it's just Alucard there.
Yeah, but no offense to Alucard, but he strikes me as more pompous and boring than his father. So even at risk of my own soul, I'd rather talk to Dracula because it seems.
Well, honestly, I'd also be there, and because I feel like he would need someone to talk to.
Oh God, yeah. Alucard needs so much of the therapy, just all the therapy.
Just a friend, just on the fact that his quote unquote real friends kind of left him.
Yeah, and I hope they address that in season 3 because it's just like, wait a minute, you do know he just lost his father, which he himself had to kill because of the loss of his mother and the fact that it made his father want to exterminate all humans, right?
Yeah.
Like, if there's anywhere you need to be right now, it's with Alucard trying desperately to not let him fucking go into unending despair and kill himself.
Yeah, that's really the main reason why I wanted to visit Dracula's castle after the fact. When Alucard's there.
It's just Alucard needs all the hugs, like just all of them.
Who knows? Maybe they're gonna bring in the thief, the character that was brought up in this video earlier, and then he'll be
Grant and Esty, the thief, and the I want to say she was a mechanist of some kind.
In all honesty, I think it would be the thief that would be at Dracula's castle.
Yeah, because if Dracula's gone and both the famous Belmont Horde and the Dracula Horde of knowledge and magical artifacts and shit are all in one place and only Alucard is guarding them, you can bet your ass some enterprising thief would just be like, and yoink.
Yeah, and if they don't do that for season 3 or something in the future, that's going to be one hell of a missed opportunity.
I don't know if we're ever going to see Grant or SD again. To be honest with you, I think they just left them out because a thief and a mechanist aren't nearly as interesting as a Dhampir, a sorceress, and a
Belmont.
Yeah. I like the fact that Belmonts are just their own thing now. Like, it's hard because you can't reduce them down to just a monster hunter, but yeah, still, I think that Trevor Belmont and John Constantine would get along really well. Although I imagine they would get drunk far too much.
Yeah, probably.
Just all the alcohol in like all of Europe and like England too, like just all of it.
Jack-o'-lantern?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
And such. The enormous Belmont Library hidden beneath the family home is a repository for centuries of knowledge where the 3 heroes spend almost the whole of the 2nd season. The knowledge inside does eventually help them defeat Dracula, even if Alucard isn't a fan.
It's like a museum dedicated to the extermination of my people, so no.
Yeah, that's fair, Alucard. That's fair. Although I will point out that books and things of that nature aren't the only thing that's there. Also a series of magical artifacts and things, and the same is true of Dracula's library as well. It
also
store of very powerful magical artifacts.
Also, if I remember correctly, there are different, well, not just skulls of unnecessary vampires.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just skulls of vampires and other things, but they also hunted other monsters too. So it's technically not just a shrine. It's not just a library of collected knowledge of how to exterminate vampires. But
Yeah, it's also knowledge of how to exterminate every other fucking thing, and also spells, because apparently the other Belmonts don't share Trevor's mistrust of magic, because they understand that there's a difference between dark magic and the rest of magic.
um, sorry. I mean, I kind of have to agree with the Belmonts, though. To have this knowledge makes a lot of sense, just on the fact that most of the time monsters, like the things that go bump in the night, aren't nice, and will try and kill humanity.
This is true.
Granted, I would argue to try and make peace with some of the things that go bump in the night, but sometimes that won't happen. So you need to be prepared.
and it's useful to know how to bump back as and when you need to.
Yeah. Not saying you should use that knowledge to preemptively strike. I'm saying it's more of, just
but
be
but
prepared.
it seems like the rest of the Belmonts understood that, because they don't have the prohibition against magic that Trevor does. I think if the Belmonts weren't as open to magic, they would probably be burning a lot of magic users as well, and probably wouldn't be very good friends with the speakers, considering that a lot of them are magicians.
Yeah. So
Speaking of which, I do wonder if we'll ever see any other speaker magicians in the in the series. I hope so.
it takes a while for the series to come out. I know that. Like what? Every 2 years?
Yeah, but still, it's taking quite long. I mean, they really should schedule it for October, because it's fucking Dracula, and it's magic, and it's medieval, and it's dark.
Right.
So why the fuck is it not for Halloween exactly?
Yeah. That's not really related to the video. That's just a.
No, just another sidebar. But at any rate, jack-o'-lanterns.
Trill.
We even see how Sypha and Trevor mock each other's method of passing on knowledge, only to see them require it later. Sypha resists the need for written history, but admits later that,
I am coming to the conclusion that my people are idiots.
while Trevor jokes about the foolishness of the speaker's oral tradition, in the end, though, it's Sypha's.
To the best of my knowledge, she didn't really resist the need for a written tradition. Other speakers did, and it's kind of implied that she agrees with them on some level, but she's far more open-minded, as evidenced by the fact that she's the one that goes to fucking fight the Cyclops in the crypt, Alucard's crypt. So I think you might be reaching a little bit there to make this work. Granted, most of the rest of what you just said is fine. So moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
1 second. Okay.
Oral histories that contain the key to opening the family vault.
I guess the special trick was passed down to generations.
Then there's Dracula. Described as a polymath by Alucard, Dracula hoards scientific knowledge much like the Belmonts, performing experiments that result in teleportation and shattered windows that make you functionally omniscient.
Okay. Fuck. It just fuck. Okay. Thing one. He's not just a hoarder of science. You yourself just said he is a polymath. What does polymath mean? It means someone with multiple areas of specialization and multiple kinds of knowledge. Incidentally, also, you could have mentioned that he wasn't academically trained, and therefore he was also an autodidact, but that's neither here nor there. More to the point, his experiments, and I can't even why, just why. Like, yes, sometimes magical operations are referred to as experiments in some grimoires, but it's because the particular magician's magic is going to be functionally different than other magicians will be when faced with the same magical knowledge, i.e., some magic can be personalized and therefore it should be experimented with. But in general, magic is not experimental. Magic is known quantities of things in the realm of metaphysics. And thus empiricism has exactly no place in magic. Rationalism does, empiricism does not. But you and I both, or I assume you know enough to know that his teleportation is not science-based. It is magic-based. As we see, his what essentially amounts to what you could call a Platonic difference engine is what allows for his teleportation. Namely, and I'm gonna have to spoil a little bit my own video for this, but essentially the way that Dracula's teleportation works is via what's called Platonic axiomatic realism, i.e., Plato postulated that there is a substructure or an infrastructure of reality where concepts are not just things that are fabricated by human mind, but that they actually functionally exist, and that they sort of help shape the fabric of reality. By manipulating that, by using what are referred to as the Platonic solids, or specifically in this case, what I believe is a kind of isohedron, which he has enchanted, Dracula can essentially reorient the fabric of reality via manipulating Platonic magic to teleport. There's no science anywhere in there. You could make the argument that the Platonic difference engine is made with some kind of nanotech, but given that we never see any kind of evidence of that, and we do see that his scrying mirror, and that's what it is, by the way, that window of his is just a scrying mirror, was made by a bunch of monks in a monastery in the Middle Ages. So it's not some ancient alien technology. What it is a scrying mirror, which is specifically magic. Yes, there are moments where it resembles what you could call a tablet or something of that nature, like a modern iPad style tablet, but that's more up to the animators not being able to conceptualize properly, more so than anything. It's not trying to make the Arthur C. Clarke magic extremely advanced science is indistinguishable. It's not making that point. It's not making the magic and science are indistinguishable point. It's just saying that certain kinds of knowledge overlap. That's the point they're trying to make there. And once again, your stupid fucking resistance to use the term magic really fucking irks me. Because you know, like, if you had made a rule against, like, ever talking about metaphysics or ever talking about magic, that would be one thing. But you've done entire videos on occultism. You know that it exists, and roughly, at least theoretically, how it works. Why are you not bringing it up here in a medieval setting where it's very, very applicable? Fuck me.
Jack-o'-lantern?
Jack-o'-lanterns. Fine.
Dracula's knowledge is organized not just by written documents and books, like the Belmonts, but his own memory, similar to the way the speakers retain their knowledge. In the first episode, we see his laboratory and learn how isolated he's become in his work. Lisa then convinces him to reconnect with the human world and to share his knowledge.
Maybe I can teach.
Okay, there's not much to complain about there. Jack-o'-lanterns.
You to like people again.
But unlike Sypha and Trevor, he, after some convincing, starts to share that knowledge with the outside world. Unfortunately, that doesn't work out too well because when he shares his scientific discoveries, well, which leads us to the church.
Okay. I'm gonna have to do it again. Jared, I realize that the knowledge that Dracula gave to Lisa is specifically scientific, because that is specifically what she asked for. But by only referencing Dracula's scientific discoveries and not his magical ones, you've given the impression once again that his magical discoveries do not meaningfully exist and science is all he ever did. And again, according to your own video, which you referenced, he is a polymath, which means that he must have multiple areas of specialization. Are we clear, Jared? Because I really don't want to have to fucking bring this up again. It's really fucking annoying me now. You're willfully leaving out all the mystical aspects of Castlevania unless you absolutely positively have to talk about them, because in your mind they must be an analogy for something rather than a kind of knowledge, to use your parlance, in and of themselves. And if you had taken magical knowledge into your consideration when making this theory, you might have been able to make it its own video entirely, rather than just haphazardly throwing 3 separate themes that you didn't get all the way through together for. Okay. Moving on.
We weren't even at 40 seconds, but okay. I feel like you needed that.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
They store their knowledge too, but in a hierarchy with the Pope on top. God's will is only to be understood by ordained men, and it's their interpretation of written knowledge, i.e. the Bible, that matters most.
To all intents and purposes, I am the church.
The church uses this knowledge only.
Okay. First of all, one of the things that's made very clear in the series is the church itself has very little consideration for practical, actionable knowledge. What it has instead are moral narratives, i.e. stories. And while you could argue that stories are in some ways a kind of knowledge, theirs is deliberately devoid of practical knowledge. That's why they outlawed people like the Belmonts, because their knowledge of the metaphysical aspects of reality are practicable, i.e. they have techniques and weaponry and things that does effectively work against magical shit and spiritual shit. And that's why the church fears people like the Belmonts and people like the Speakers, because their approach to spiritual matters actually fucking works. It's not just their ignorance in the failure to distinguish between magic and science. It's the problem here. It's that they prefer reality to be devoted entirely to stories and narratives. They don't want to have to deal with practical knowledge in any meaningful way, and as such, they don't have it. And as such, as we discussed earlier, their churches are quote unquote empty boxes. By the way, that demon had an amazing voice in that episode, and funnily enough, that's always how I picture Dream sounding in my head when I'm reading Sandman. It's almost identical to how I imagine him sounding.
I'm gonna be honest. I thought it was more not monster-like.
The demon gargoyle thing.
Yeah, I thought for Dream, I always pictured him being, well, British.
Well, yeah, but so the demon from Castlevania is British as far as or at least his translation is British, because presumably they're all speaking like Romanian and shit for this entire series.
And okay, yeah, that's true. It's just that how I always pictured, how I always thought Dream sounded was, well, you know that video you sent me of that comic dub.
Oh yeah, you think he kind of sounds like that? Yeah, that's close to how I picture him
Well,
sounding.
either that, or like the sound, trying to think of the actor's name, but a very British sound.
Would he play?
Honestly, I think Patrick Stewart. I think Dream would sound like Patrick Stewart.
Dream's voice is or reminds you of Patrick Stewart, Because the closest I would say is either Alan Rickman or Christopher Lee would be my top choices to play Dream because of how they sound.
Yeah, honestly, I think more Christopher Lee than anything.
Yeah.
Not Christopher Lee. Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, folks. I'm
It would have
out
been
of it
so
right now.
amazing as Dream if he was still alive. God damn it. Anyway, fanboying issues over.
Jack o' Lanterns.
Jack-o'-lanterns, yes.
Only held by a select few to wield power over the illiterate masses. And this is where we thought we could say that Castlevania's treatment of knowledge bears some resemblance to philosopher Michel Foucault's theory of knowledge and power. This Lex Luthor lookalike explored knowledge and power as separate entities that were inextricably linked. For Foucault, everything has some form of.
Okay, but the thing about Foucault's definition of power is he doesn't essentially Foucault, by virtue of being a postmodernist, doesn't believe in objective reality. He even believes that the self is a social construct. And he goes so far as to say that in order to be a successful human being, you should work against yourself to essentially deconstruct your own mind. So, frankly, I don't give a shit about his definition of power, because his definition of power is in the context of power is the only true determiner of knowledge. Hence, the point I assume you're about to make. But yeah, most of what you're about to say isn't technically wrong. It's just really, really sort of disingenuous when you take Foucault's definition of knowledge and power outside of his framework, where power was the only determiner of objectivity.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Jack-o'-lantern.
Power, now some things more than others, and it's not always obvious how that power influences the world. For instance, as you confess to a priest, you may think of the priest as having power over you since he's judging you, but to Foucault, it's a bit more nuanced than that. As you confess your sin, you create knowledge, perhaps the knowledge that you are playing your switch.
Okay. And this is my issue here, because the reason why Foucault thought that is because he thought that something only becomes knowledge once it's given authority. And if you paid attention to Castlevania, you know the approach of knowledge is only knowledge if it's given authority is the exact opposite of the opinion that Castlevania appears to hold, if it can be said to hold any opinions at all, because the most authority obsessed group in Castlevania is the fucking church, and they are demonstrated to be the least practically knowledgeable about shit. Essentially, the reason why Foucault can get away with saying you create knowledge when you confess to a priest is because in Foucault's mind, knowledge only exists insofar as it's given authority by more than one human. Whereas I would say you don't create knowledge when you confess to a priest, you just transmit knowledge, i.e., the knowledge existed in you that you had done that before you told it to anyone. And society and culture don't just materialize into existence from cultural consensus, i.e., you don't need to be observed by another human being in order to exist. You just need to objectively exist. And so on. This is why Foucault was largely Fougar. And this is why I eventually lost my taste for philosophy for a little while, because they had me studying shit like this instead of like practical shit in relation to philosophy. Yeah. But it ended up being useful after all, because now I understand where SJWs are coming from, because thinkers like Foucault and Nietzsche heavily influenced the postmodern critical theory that eventually led to the rise of social justice. So thank you, Foucault, for your definition of power, just so that I can deconstruct and ruin it, because It needs to be deconstructed and ruined because you were fucking FUBAR, sir.
Moving
But
on.
anyway, back to Jared. Jack-o'-lanterns.
During Mass. The knowledge generated by confessing may create guilt in you regardless of the priest's judgment. The knowledge you generated in the confession is what exerts power over you, not only the priest shaking his head at the notion that you spammed Isabel's fishing pole. Basically, the priest could stay silent and you'd still feel like because the act of
Jared, my dude. Again, you don't create knowledge, and I know you're just using one of Foucault's examples, because this is straight up one of Foucault's examples that he gives. But by virtue of you saying it, you're giving legitimacy to it, and therefore I have to deal with this shit now. You don't create any more knowledge than you previously had by confessing your knowledge. All you do is transmit and spread the knowledge that already existed, i.e., you would feel guilty even if you confessed it to no one, because assuming you already knew what you had done was wrong in your own mind, you would be already feeling guilty. You would not believe how many people show up to confession already weeping and bawling like 2-year-olds because they know they've done something wrong. There's nothing in the transmission of that information that makes it any more impactful than it would be in the confines of your own head. If you believe that something is wrong and you have knowledge that you've done it, that knowledge is going to tear you apart by virtue of those two axioms, regardless of even if you don't tell it to anybody. In fact, as we know, repressing information about things you've done wrong can make you even more fucking crazy because you feel guilty about not sharing it with people. This entire framework is FUBAR, sir. Please stop using it. For fuck's sake. And why you feel the need to apply postmodernism to medieval Europe when there's so much esoteric philosophy and rationalism and empiricism and all this other shit you could have gone through if you just abided by a slightly more literalistic and straightforward interpretation rather than going off into abstract woo-wooville. You make a mockery of philosophy, you make a mockery of magic, and you make a mockery of medieval history. And given that I love all three of those things, you are making me very, very pissed, sir. Jack-o'-lanterns.
confessing itself holds power. In Castlevania, we get a good look at how knowledge interacts with power, but not necessarily this endless cycle of power and knowledge influencing each other that Foucault is talking about. The church is threatened by Lisa and Dracula's power knowledge because their science would reduce the bishop's religious power, so he has Lisa killed.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, then why the fuck did you bring Foucault up if you know it's completely useless? You just made me have to relive my late semester philosophy days for no goddamn reason other than to remind me that Foucault exists and to make me very, very depressed because Foucault existed. But more to the point, no, the bishop isn't threatened by the power of the scientific knowledge. He's threatened by the notion, A, that she's not of the devil, and B, it has nothing to do with him being threatened because he's not threatened by her, he's morally affronted by her. He finds the thing she's doing to be shameful and therefore acts in accordance with his belief that things which are shameful should either be repented for or gotten rid of. And considering that because of his misunderstanding of her, she doesn't want to repent, he burns her at the stake. It has nothing to do with threat and has everything to do with him finding her morally repugnant. Now, he is fundamentally wrong for thinking that for a whole host of reasons that could be a video by itself, but that's the reason. Don't fucking ad hominem fictional characters, for fuck's sake. It's one thing to ad hominem human beings, but it's entirely another thing to ad hominem away the motives of fictional goddamn characters. Fuck you, sir. Ugh. And all to fit your stupid cockamamie narrative. You're starting to remind me way more of that bishop than you should, sir. But anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
Hill to stop her.
How can engines of the devil be physic human?
The show constantly suggests that knowledge is a power that must be maintained.
To save your genius, your knowledge, and your will, without question. I am just a forge master. Yours is the wisdom of ages.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty much boils down to knowledge is power, as in, I know these magic words that can set you on fire, which is kind of cliche and not quite what Foucault meant. Maybe if the church had to grapple with how their godly knowledge in part controlled them, this pitch might have worked. Or if Trevor and Sypha explored what their own methods of keeping knowledge meant besides using.
So in other words, you are completely wrong and you realize you're completely wrong, but you're still babbling on about it regardless. And for the record, with a few exceptions, words are never used in Castlevania to channel magical energy. It's just gestures as far as we can see in most cases. So, yeah, bollocks. Not only are you completely erasing magic when it's convenient for you, but you're oversimplifying it and making fun of it when you're not able to completely marginalize it. So, fuck you, sir. You really, really should have just taken an occult spin on this. It would have made this video much, much more tolerable and not made you look like such a thundering dumbass. Because I know you're not a thundering dumbass, but you're making it very hard for me not to call you a thundering dumbass right now. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Using a magic mirror, it also might.
Okay, so you do acknowledge that the mirror that both Dracula and the gang use throughout the series is a scrying mirror and not a window, quote unquote. Just so we're clear. Okay. Fuck me, the hypocrisy is astounding, and on my move.
I had to start over again because ad.
Using a magic mirror, it also might have worked better. The final pitch we got is class, and I'll give this one like a 5 out of 10. One of the themes in Bram Stoker's original novel is class. It tells the story of a wealthy count in Romania who literally lives off the blood of the peasants. He then calls for a lawyer so he can buy property in London and do the same thing there.
Wow, this is actually giving me a headache.
You know what's funny? We actually had another video we were considering covering that was about Bram Stoker's Dracula movie, since he uses footage here.
We might cover it next week.
Yeah.
Anyway, point being, Jared, you are reading way I don't care if Bram Stoker intended that to be in there. That is a flimsy metaphor at best. And again, you're foregoing the literalistic interpretation of it's a goddamn vampire for classism. God damn you. Because now you've made me have to delve into the whole class issue, and I don't want to, but I'm going to anyway. Yeah, no, Dracula doesn't give a shit about the class of the people he feeds upon. In fact, if anything, as we see with Mina and Lucy, he prefers young, virginal, aristocratic women because they are more highborn and their blood is more pure in his lexicon, and therefore, not only is it tastier, but it's actually more vital. We see this referenced in Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who is one of the two main inspirations for Dracula, who literally tried to extend her youth by draining the blood from virginal women. Because virgin blood is more pure and more refined, therefore it can be used to make you more beautiful. And yet she did actually give quite a few of her victims essentially what amounts to elocution training, because she thought that refining their souls through education would make their blood more potent. So your class metaphor, even if it is an intentional addition by Bram Stoker, is completely fucking foobar. Jared. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Give me a second. Putting on gloves because I have my fan on and it is like, what's the degree again?
Ah. Then you're forgiven for giving me the cold shoulder. And there is the familiar sensation of the glare.
51 degrees right now. Okay, hold on. Okay.
Stoker, who was Irish, lived most of his life in London, and if you know the British, they are obsessed with class. Well, at least that's what our resident Brit Leo tells us. The show's writer, Warren Ellis, also British, explores class struggles in his comics like Transmetropolitan and Trees, so it's no surprise that this theme appears in Castlevania. The show paints a graphic...
Okay, explain to me how first, and then we'll talk. But for the record, your reference in Dracula is completely fucking foobar, because again, the literal interpretation contradicts entirely the metaphorical interpretation. This is why it's important not to completely forgo the straightforward literal interpretation of things when analyzing them, especially in art. Okay, but anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
1 second. And I'm putting on my voodoo priest hat.
He's got friends on the other side.
I didn't even think of that.
Well, it's a good thing there's two of us out there.
Yeah. For the record, folks, I got something for a Halloween costume. Have a mask, but it's kind of crappy mask. I might post pictures later. But okay. Yeah. Moving on.
picture of the feudal class system in Wallachia, where the few peasants we see literally goats.
He says to me, I know your goats. So you said, oh, bullshit. So I says, how? And he says, well, she f***s me, don't she?
And hate the rich families.
Okay. One thing, that scene is a joke. It's a fucking joke.
Okay, there's that, but there's also the fact that they are supposed to be deliberately ignorant, motherfuckers, and they're the only ones that actually bring up class in the entire history of the show. So in other words, it seems like the show is shitting on your class interpretation, because when those peasants make that class interpretation, it is very easily shown that they are wrong, because they unnecessarily shit all over Trevor Belmont, and then in the process he both gets his ass kicked and kicks their asses, and then that he's not around to save them when they need saving. So is this a class interpretation that's in favor of class hierarchy or against it? Because your allusion to Bram Stoker's Dracula from earlier makes me assume that you're on the anti-class side of the matter, which, you know, fair enough, I suppose, but you appear to be doing it from like the quasi-Marxist or Hegelian approach to class, which bothers me. Not least of which because it's completely fucking foobar. But if this is supposed to be a version of classism that's in favor of class, why the fuck is it never mentioned beyond the one comedic scene where people start getting class outraged and then get their ass kicked and then have to crawl back to their you know, economic betters, if you want to call them that, to save them? if this class thing is true, then you, sir, are completely then you're making a completely ambiguous statement about class, and if it's not true, then you are completely wrong. So fuck off. That's the long and short of it. I could see why you only gave this 5 points of possibility here, but even then, you did present this as an interpretation, so now I have to debunk it as and when it's debunkable. That's how this works.
Is it bad that my hands won't stop shaking because of how cold they are, even if they're in gloves?
That might be a little bad. Do you have blankets that you can like throw upon yourself to warm yourself up?
Oh, I should probably put on a jacket.
That would probably be good too.
Yeah. But I'm too lazy. I'm too lazy to get up right now.
Okay, dude. If you get hypothermia because of laziness, I'm going to be very mad at you. So go and
I'm getting the jacket. That was me trying to be funny, and apparently it didn't land.
No, it didn't land. It just brought out my friend is in danger and I need to help them impulse. Because I don't care about 90% of humans, but you are one of the few humans I give a damn about. So don't do self-destructive bullshit.
Okay, but do we have anything else to say before we move on, or?
No, we can jack-o'-lantern.
Okay.
Jack-o'-lantern.
Great houses in Greece. Vlad Dracula, an old family. The capital, all run by the great houses.
The rich families, like the Belmonts, think they're better than the poor. Even the vampires have a form of hierarchy, with Dracula as their leader, the vampire generals below him, and the wing.
Okay. For the record, I don't think Trevor or Belmont's thought themselves better
than anyone. And if anything, that scene demonstrates they are substantively better in a lot of ways, namely because of the knowledge that you just spent 2 minutes of my time ejaculating nonsense over. So, again, your class thing makes absolutely no sense, as is so often the case in these matters. And for the record, the power hierarchy among vampires is mostly merit-based in the sense that the older, wiser, and more powerful the vampire, the higher in that hierarchy they are. So unless you're straight up against any kind of hierarchy whatsoever, or against meritocracy, this is not really a class struggle issue. And you're being completely foobar again. Again, I know you only gave this 5 points, but those points are really gaping further than I think even you realize. So I'm here to provide the necessary peer review for your philosophizing, sir. Because that is what we do in philosophy. We peer review other people's shit sometimes.
Okay. Bubble up.
Okay, huzzah. You're not going to die.
Funny enough,
Okay.
I could have just turned off the fan.
You probably should have. Did you?
I did not. To be honest, I like having it on, even if it is freezing cold. Well, not freezing cold, but it's still cold.
Okay, but if you continue to be cold, I'm going to have to recommend that you turn it off.
I'm pretty actually bundled up right now.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Well, that.
I mean,
that
my legs are
that's good.
kind of cold, but they're always cold.
Yeah, but
Lack of iron or something, I think. I don't know. It's weird.
yeah, just don't make me unnecessarily concerned for your well-being again.
It is very sweet that you care.
Like I said, it takes a lot for me to care about people, but once I decide that you're worth caring about, there is scarcely little that I can do to prevent myself from caring about you. So there. Moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Horrors beneath them. It's vaguely feudalistic, with vampires bound to serve the vampire who turned them, like Carmilla before she broke the rules and murdered her master.
I was bound to him until I decided to kick back
My word.
This bond they have, or fealty as it was called, is some
Okay, for the record, it kind of makes sense because it's like progen. It's like a progeny thing, and apparently we had someone in our chat like literally not a minute or so ago.
Wow, huzzah.
Zachary Moppin. I see. I also see I'm alone in this chat. And I believe they had popped out.
You were at one time alone, yes. And I would like to know what that I see is in response to, sir.
It was at 10:38. What? I don't really think there was discussion at 10:38. Was there?
I think that was just you getting your clothes and me being unnecessarily paternal because reasons.
All right, but back to it. Vampires who are made by other vampires, progeny or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like a parent lover sort of relationship with those vampires.
And also, you're criticizing a feudal structure in a medieval setting. I'm sorry, but what? Like a medieval setting, and you're complaining about feudalism. Like I like the history geek in me is utterly baffled. Like even if this weren't a straight up medieval setting, which it is, these are ancient beings and they have been doing the same shit for thousands, possibly tens of thousands of years. So what exactly are you playing at? Are you expecting vampire democracy? Like, bearing in mind that this is a war scenario also, so of course the person who called the generals is going to be in some kind of command over said generals, because that's how, war structures work.
You know what's funny? I had written a story of vampires, and I think I did write somewhat of a democracy for their society.
Vampire democracy.
Well, the thing is that it was based on like the oldest vampires of the territory were in charge, and there was a council and stuff.
All I'm able to envision is the phrase "equality of blood." Like that's really I don't know why that's so funny to me, but the phrase "equality of blood" is really springing to mind.
I don't get it.
I don't really get it either. It's just that's the phrase that popped into my, because if it's a vampire democracy, obviously they're fixated on blood. So like I could see them like pitching it to each other as, "This shall be the equality of blood," or the covenant of the equality of blood, by which we shall govern ourselves in a democratic format from now until the end of the vampire race, etc.
Yeah. Did you have anything else to say, Don? Or?
No, we can move on.
But yeah, again with the whole actually before we move on, the Vampire Society thing, keep in mind that I would think most of them existed or lived prior to the, I guess, in the time of Wallachia, it's like the 1400s, right?
I think according to the timeline, Dracula's wife died in 1425, I think.
Well, right, okay. But yeah, so and that's like around the time of the Dark Ages, correct?
Well, the sort of starting towards the end of them, yeah.
Yeah.
But what did you title this this episode, by the way?
I believe it React and Review.
Okay. So there. I just wondered. I actually wondered if Zachary was someone from Wisecrack, and he was confused by what we were saying whilst he popped in there, and that's why he was that's why he said what he said. But if all you said was react and review, that's a different thing. Anyway,
Okay.
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Similar to the way vassals were obligated to their lord in feudal systems. Carmilla also agitates against this class structure because she sees herself as better and more capable than the rest of the vampires. In the end, she even takes Hector as a pet to prove her superiority. Characters who are born into power, typically through inherited knowledge,
Well, for one thing, I will say Carmilla, it's Carmilla, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a bitch.
Yeah.
And
I do play by the same actress who played the Black Fairy in Once Upon a Time.
no. Ooh.
Yeah. But incidentally, it's gonna be really funny to me when Camilla makes Hector make her an army, and then she remembers, oh wait, the creatures are loyal to the Forge Master, not the person who the Forge Master answers to. So it's gonna be really funny to me if he makes her that army, and then he's like, "Oh, remember, the Forge are always loyal to the Forge Master, and you had me make you an army. So, snap, I'd like my freedom now." Basically, I could definitely see that happening. In fact, I really hope it does, and I hope that Hector and Isaac team up, and that's how Dracula gets brought back. Because it's usually the Forge Masters who end up bringing Dracula back through a mystical ritual that involves usually an eclipse or blood moon. Usually, I think, if I remember my Castlevania lore correctly. But anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
Elf or both are put at the top of the food chain, literally, while those at the bottom are treated like dirt. When the peasants in the tavern discover Trevor is a Belmont, they attack him out of class hatred, and the speakers are treated like dirt because of their status as lowly nomads. This class structure dictates every character's position in the show.
Right. Okay. So this whole class thing, to bring up, we forgot to cover this with Carmilla, is that again, she thinks the whole thing with, I guess, the age thing with vampires. And
yeah, she considers Dracula to be old and weak and feeble and therefore undeserving of his position. Regardless, though,
yeah,
you appear to be contradicting your own shit, Jared, because the thing is, the reason people hate the speakers is because they think they're witches.
Yeah,
and
the reason why Trevor was attacked wasn't because he was a higher class. It was because they thought the Belmonts were responsible for Dracula's carnage, because according to them, the Belmonts used black magic and made deals with monsters, when in fact Belmonts fought monsters.
The Belmonts deal in black magic, and now black magic is destroying Wallachia, etc. Yeah, yes, the class angle has something to do with it, but as I said, through the majority of the series, they are the only ones that ever actually bring up class, and they're idiots. Portrayed both diegetically and non-diegetically as fucking idiots. So this entire point is the point of fucking idiocy, Jared. Moving on.
Joe. Now, while class is an overriding theme in the original book about Dracula and is present in Castlevania 2, we don't really have much more to say. It's discussed by characters and shown to be a thing, we just couldn't find a way to show how it develops into a coherent theme or exploration. So, as you can see, there's a lot of smart things to talk about in Castlevania, and
Yeah, and you've poorly talked about or barely talked about most of them. So, you probably aren't exactly qualified to talk about this, it seems. Or at the very least, you need to rethink your positioning here. And as I demonstrated earlier in my analysis of your points about the novel, the fact of class being a theme in the novel is highly debatable, even if Bram Stoker purposely put it in there. So there. But jack-o'-lanterns. And God bless you.
Thank you. Oh God, that shot my throat.
Oh
Ah,
dear.
I'm good. Jesus Christ, that was hard sneeze. Jesus. Like I feel it in my like chest, like the breastbone, dude. Ah. Ah. Okay.
maybe it's just too early in the show for all of this to point to some kind of definitive thesis. Either way, the show is dope, and we can't wait to see what Season 3 offers. Now, whether you're looking to hoard knowledge to better yourself or better humanity, you guys got to give Skillshare a try.
Okay, so I think this is just
Okay. Enough with that. Yes, we don't need the show at the end. Not that I in any way
Oh.
resent his show at the end. It's just unnecessary to respond
well.
to.
Okay, here's the funny part. That takes up like the last 2 minutes of a 15-minute video.
Yeah. Well, shill's a show. It's fine. But at any rate, Jared, I hate to burst your bubble, but it's also possible you just got it wrong. Like your interpretations are incomplete because your points are somewhat facile and were poorly strung together. That is quite an option there, and it seems as though, to me at least, the themes of Castlevania are perfectly solidified already. It's just they require a certain level of respect for the literal interpretation or the straightforward interpretation rather than the abstract academic woo interpretations.
So, what would you say the theme is?
I would say the themes are the nature of medieval history, the dangers of becoming subservient to an authoritarian morality, the distinctions between different kinds of knowledge and epistemology, and I would even venture to say it's in a lot of ways straight up allegorical, as in the speakers as an allegory for the Romani, which I also talked about in my video on this topic. So if you're interested in slightly more coherent equivalents of my ramblings, then go and find the video that I made, which is a look back at Castlevania Season 1.
Right.
It has Dracula's flaming face as the thumbnail, so that should make it easier to find.
Wait, which flaming face? Like his actual face or the skeleton face?
His actual face.
Okay. Well, I will certainly check that out, good buddy. And y'all should too.
Yeah. Have you seen that video yet, or had
No, I haven't. I mean, I was subscribed to your channel for a little bit, but I don't think I ever saw that video. I watched a lot of your videos pretty much after we started the podcast and became friends and stuff.
I see. So yeah, because that was actually one of my earlier. That was one of my earliest videos. There's stuff. There's some stuff if you feel. I think that video was like 20 to 30 minutes long. I think it was close to 40 actually. I don't remember. I do remember it went on longer than I would have liked because I remember seeing the end result and going, fuck, that was long. I thought about cutting it down, but I didn't really think any of the bits that I said were worth it.
Oh, hey, Ahsoka Tano Gaming's here. What's up, Ahsoka? So what we going to review? I say we review a meme video. Sorry, Ahsoka, you kind of missed.
You
just reviewed it,
came
yeah.
in just as we were finished there. Feel
Yeah.
free to rewind the video and watch from the beginning.
Yeah. We are probably not going. Well, we are doing a offstage soliloquy tomorrow, and that's going to be Halloween themed. Well, October themed anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, we are basically we're kind of taking a break, a pseudo break from everything, and just kind of having fun.
We're being festive and paying our respects to the forces of Halloween and so forth. And if those forces become assaulted by social justice nonsense, then we will still be there to smack it down as we do. But we're not unless it presents itself, we're not going to purposefully make cringy bullshit.
Right. I mean, at one point, I did suggest we were going to cover the classic go-to for Halloween SJW dumbass shittery.
Yeah, the issue of the sexy costumes, and maybe we will still, but honestly, I think if we're gonna do that, if we're gonna do that though, we should either wait until some more substantive articles come out about it, or we should save up all the little stupid ones and kind of do them all at once.
Yeah, but I do think at some point we might cover it. 4chan once saved a cat.
Good for 4chan. 4chan is surprisingly useful at times, and ludicrously what the fuck am I reading at other times, but that's neither here nor there.
Right. So yeah, from Podcast The Storm, I wish to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avidaze, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
shalom. Now fuck off. And if you're Ahsoka Tano Gaming,